China has instructed its largest oil refiners to suspend exports of diesel and gasoline as escalating conflict in the Middle East threatens global crude supply and tightens energy markets. The directive from the country's top economic planner asked refiners to halt new export contracts and attempt to cancel existing shipments, prioritizing domestic fuel availability. China, the world's largest crude importer, relies heavily on the Gulf region for oil supplies, with about 57% of its seaborne crude imports coming from the Middle East in 2025. To unpack this, I'm joined by Ejike Okpa, Global Affairs Analyst. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thank you for having me.
All right, China has told the country's largest oil refiners to suspend exports of diesel and gasoline due to an escalating conflict in the Persian Gulf. First, let me get your reaction to this Persian issue. Beg your pardon.
That's okay. Well, I mean, this is one of the cases of self-preservation. China doesn't have a whole lot of crude being produced domestically. So what they're doing now is to just, limiting export of processed crude. I mean, a processed product to countries, and they want to, hold what they have until they get a grip on what is going on in the Middle East. China's supply to other countries is not very significant. So this is not even official. It's one of those things. Their economic advisors just felt, hey, we need to slow this down and then see what happens. So we'll see what happens in the next 30 days, even if it gets that long, as this, conflict, is about to get resolved, for the goodness of everybody.
Well, you don't seem perturbed by this because we're looking at the fact that China is Asia's third biggest fuel exporter. Don't you see any impact as a result of this, maybe translating into higher transport and logistics costs for neighboring economies?
No, it's not. If you look at it again, this is for their own domestic need, and then for countries, I think there are two countries that they supply stuff to. But so far, those other countries haven't expressed concern, and they just waiting and watching what is going on. China is doing this again, like I said earlier, to preserve their own domestic interest while they watch what is going on and see what direction they're going to go.
How long do you even see this continuing for?
It's not going to be long. I think there are moves on the part of Iran, to ceasefire and get into some, lasting negotiation with America. But then sometimes these things happen. It's temporary. You never know some other people that come in and say, we got to have to fight. Fight doesn't benefit, the weak side of things. America can wipe out, whatever they think they want to do with Iran, especially now that, the U.S. Senate has given the president the power to go ahead and do what he's doing. So all bets, that, Congress or the Senate was going to slow him down is off the table. And so with that kind of pressure now, Iran is saying it because China, that's, China that looks up to Iran for their supply, didn't even get ahead of this stuff to protect their own interest. It was more like they were reacting after the fact. Russia wouldn't do anything, and they've never done anything. Russia was never getting in the way of the U.S. when things happen. Everybody can go and issue resolution and say, oh, international law, international that. America is aware of international law, but they still do what they want to do. Is that a lesson? Yes. Would this be the end of it? Nobody knows, but I think countries should start looking at bilateral relationships. And when you are weak, recognize your weakness. Don't just show up in a boxing ring thinking that without a glove, you're going to be able to punch. This is a punching time, and we're looking at those who have the gloves and who know how to punching. But I think this conflict will be over in a matter of weeks, days, because Iran has noticed its own capacity is very limited.
Right. I like how that you also pointed to the fact that we're saying the failure. I mean, some have called it failure. You may not agree it's failure, but, they're looking at it as failure of a rules-based order. And you went ahead to say America can choose to do whatever it wants to do. I guess we'll come back to that if I have the time. But before that, I think it's important I say this. I mean, we've also seen reduced or no activity in the Strait of Hormuz. How challenging has this been for countries, that are directly or even indirectly affected by this?
Well, when you do a pebble drop, it's going to carry waves. Countries in the region, rely on that strait to, do their trade, have been affected. But before this happened, there were measures. Again, self-preservation is the first order of business. Anything else is playing to the gallery. Countries are supposed to learn how to self-preserve, and how you self-preserve is, you keep an eye on your neighbors. Igbo people used to say during the Biafran War, he who is surrounded by enemies go to sleep with one eye open. You have to be vigilant. Nation building and national sustainability is not something you do and you fold your hands. It's a constant 24/7, 365 demand. And so leadership is supposed to be continuing, and not leadership that comes in and try to do disjointed things that exposes their country, and then at the end of the day, everybody is scrambling. The world in 21st century, in 2026, shouldn't be like the world of 1940s. Now, we've seen that even the UN is powerless because they can't do anything. Resolutions haven't gotten the world the peace. So it goes down to individual countries. Yes, we live in a global village, yes, but individual countries have the right to cultivate and develop relationships that benefits them. It is, if you are not making somebody jealous, like my father used to tell me, you aren't doing anything. You have to make somebody jealous. And the way you make somebody jealous is try to succeed or try to build relationships that, expands your own capacity. I want to say this about Nigeria, the biggest country in Africa in terms of population. Well, where is Nigeria? Where is does Nigerian president even have influence in West African region? You have to get the neighbors around you, just like when you live in a neighborhood. How are your neighbors looking at you? How are they willing to even protect you when things happen? But if you are just all over the place and everybody looks like a good bride you want to take home, you're not doing anything. Be selective, have a scale of preference, and have index of nations you want to deal with because you like what they're doing. You can copy and paste. But when you copy, do you have the will to paste? By now, Nigeria should be one of the top countries in the world where when they say something or the president of Nigeria says something, everybody pauses and think about it. Right now, nobody pays attention to Nigeria. And it's very, very unfortunate. The most populous black nation in the world, the country that has the most educated black people per country, and yet we're talking about having a gold reserve of $3 billion or comparing ourselves to Ghana. Everybody in Ghana is like the population of Lagos and Oyo State. Why should you even look up to Ghana? Why should you look up to South Africa? Nigeria should be, like we say in America, or Reagan used to say, the shining example in Africa. That should be the move. And not just, measuring it in minors, with low expectations. No, we should do better Nigeria should do better than what they're doing.
I'm tempted to not ask you this last question because you definitely took us on another, ride and all that. But I still want to ask, really. We're seeing what is happening as a result of this logistics affected. And we're seeing, price of crude oil skyrocketing and hitting the roof. But what does all this mean for Nigeria, really? I mean, I'll close on that. I'll still ask you anyway.
Well, good question. And, this is not the first time. If you chart the Nigerian revenue on oil since 1955, when Shell came into today, the highest spike Nigeria got was when Obasanjo was there. I think it's 2006 and 7 before he left office. Nigeria had maybe 60 or 70 billion dollars. That's the highest Nigeria ever had. And it was because of the Gulf War or the Gulf challenges at the time. But it's not about making the revenue. You go back and say, how has the revenue have made sustained or stabilized in Naira? When Obasanjo was in office, in 1999, if you have 1 billion 1 million naira, you almost had $12,000. Fast forward to 2026. If you are in a financial market or a financial analyst, we say solve for future value. You know, the holding period is 26 years.
All right.
Future value and present value. 1 million naira today is less than $700. How has that helped Nigeria? That's the biggest thing. It's not jumping on. Even if Nigeria was producing 8 million barrels of oil a day, which they cannot do, it's not going to make the economy strengthen. What's going to make the economy strong?
It might strengthen the naira, you know.
Policies.
That might strengthen the naira.
No, but it hasn't. It hasn't strengthened the naira because
okay, I'm afraid we have to go now.
What I'm telling you, the exchange rate.
We have to go. We have to go now. We'll continue this conversation some other time. Thank you so much, Ejike Okpa, Global Affairs Analyst. Thank you.
Well, thank you.